Buddhism from early times was divided into those who leave home to become, and the idea is, of course, they leave home to become monastics, monks or nuns, normally living in a monastery somewhere, apart from civilian life. Sometimes living is in the forest. And leaving home means also leaving the family. And you join a new family, which is called the Sangha. And then what we now in English translate as lay people, the Zaike, is the people who don't leave home. They stay home, they have families. And so there's that clear division between lay people and monastics. The tradition was that lay people, that if you really want to follow the Buddhist way, if you want to be a real Buddhist, you have to become a monastic. That the lay people are only around to support the monks and nuns. If you were generous to the monks and to the temple with your time and your money and food offerings, you would gain a lot of merit. And in your next life, maybe you would be born in a family which made it possible for you to become a monk or a nun. But there's no way as a layperson that you're going to become awakened. That's only for monastics. This is very common throughout not only East Asia but also Southeast Asia. This very strong or sharp distinction between monks and lay people. But you won't find this in the Buddhist texts at all. The Lotus Sutra never, ever suggests this kind of strong distinction between monastics and lay people. It's always talking about the four groups. And it's true, it lists monks, nuns, laymen, and lay women. But the four groups, it doesn't put these in a kind of ranking, and it certainly doesn't draw this hard, sharp line distinction between real Buddhists and the followers or the supporters. Who do you think was the first to reject this idea? Shinran. He said, talking about himself, Shinran, I am neither a monk nor a layperson. So he wanted to, as is the case in a few minutes, in a minute or two, I want to say just a word about chapter 10. It also breaks down this distinction completely. And that's, in a certain sense, it's an interesting fact. You could say that Shinran was, in a certain sense, representing chapter 10 of the Lotus Sutra. Lay Buddhism is pluralistic. It's of many kinds. It's of different nationalities. It's found in China, in California, in Japan. It's found, and it's not all of the same kind. The organizations are different. The people are different. The language is different. The texts they use are different. The teachings they emphasize are different. And their practices are different. The point I wanted to make is that that is something not to be unhappy about, but to celebrate. It's wonderful that we have this great variety of texts and teachings and peoples and ways of being Buddhist. And I think it's something that we should be glad about. And when we share our own love of the Lotus Sutra, or our love of, even in cases like in Risho Kosukai, our use of the recitation of Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, I love it. I love to recite Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. I think it's great to share that with others. But we should never, ever say, this is the only way to be a Buddhist. This is the only way for you to be a Buddhist. It isn't. There are many ways, and we need to be happy about that. And there's a tendency among Buddhists, it's also the same thing happens among Christians. There's a tendency among Buddhists to kind of recognize and appreciate other religions. Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Catholicism. But when it comes to other Buddhists, we're not quite so generous or so open or so welcome to celebrate what they do and what they teach. Just a couple words about chapter 10 of the Lotus Sutra in this connection. I don't think there's any other Buddhist text like chapter 10 of the Lotus Sutra, for breaking down or breaking through or cutting through some of these distinctions that have been so harmful to human development and progress. The sharp distinction between monastics and lay people. The sharp distinction between men and women. You know, even other places in the Lotus Sutra, sometimes the Buddha addresses good sons. But chapter 10, always good sons and good daughters. Always both. The distinction between Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Buddha, the four so-called holy ranks. Chapter 10 just cuts right through that and says, you can be a Dharma teacher. It doesn't matter whether you're a layman or a laywoman or a monk or a nun or a Shravaka or a Bodhisattva. It doesn't matter whether you're old or young, Chinese or Japanese or American. Whatever you are, you can be a Dharma teacher. That's a way of just kind of taking all of these hard, fast hierarchies and distinctions and kind of relativizing them. It doesn't do away with them. We still have these distinctions, but they become a lot weaker in a way as a result if we take chapter 10 of the Lotus Sutra seriously. Even the distinction that's so common even in secular life between human and non-human. You know what last night was?
Halloween.
Halloween. And what does Halloween celebrate? At least in common practice, Halloween is a kind of recognition, a kind of celebration of witches and goblins and other things that kind of bump around in the night on Halloween evening. You know, in the Lotus Sutra, there's lots of non-human creatures, right? I don't think we have the word goblin, but we've got lots of different kinds of demons.
Yes.
But at the time of the Buddha, the population of the world was much more diverse and rich than it is now. We've lost almost all of those friends. They're no longer around. They've all kind of disappeared from our lives. But chapter 10 of the Lotus Sutra points to a group like that. There's monks and nuns and laymen and laywomen in the very beginning. And but there's also, I think, I don't have the list. I could read it, but I don't have the list here in front of me. A long list of non-human beings. And the Bodhisattva turns to the Buddha and says, in the future, who are going to be the Buddhas? And he points to this big assembly of human and non-human living beings, and he says, they are. That's very powerful. As I've tried to indicate, a central teaching of chapter 10 is that you, each and every one of us, can be a Dharma teacher. But maybe that's not the most important teaching of chapter 10 of the Lotus Sutra. Do you know what the most important teaching is? The most important teaching of chapter 10 is that you, every one of you, can be a learner. And you can learn from anyone else. Anyone, including non-humans. And this is where the Tendai tradition is right in picking up the idea that mountains and rivers have Buddha nature. That means, and that's what chapter 10 is partly about, is not only that you can be a Dharma teacher, but that anyone, monk or nun, layman or laywoman, non-human, anyone can be a Dharma teacher for you. Well, that also is wonderful. That, if you take that seriously, it changes your whole perspective on life and living in this world. Because it means all around you. Not just in Founder Niwano, not just in Reverend Suzuki, not just in the monk or the priest or the professional clergy, but anyone at all. In some circumstances, anyone at all, including your teenage kid, or your mother-in-law. Anyone at all can be a Dharma teacher for you. Well, it makes the whole world brighter and more, more a cause for your happiness and joy. And of course, that's what the Lotus Sutra is all about. Your happiness and joy. Thank you very much.